Hello, friends. I'm Christina Adams, an OBGYN and a coach for women physicians, and welcome to the Navigating Possibility podcast. In this very first episode, I thought I'd tell you a little about me, my path to and through medicine so far, why I trained to be a coach, and why I wanted to start this podcast. I'll kind of start when I was thinking about what I was going to study in college. I, at the time, didn't think I wanted to be a doctor. In fact, my original major in college was political science. I thought I wanted to go to law school. I went to a small liberal arts school for women in Lynchburg, Virginia, called Randolph-Macon Women's College at the time. Now it's actually a co-ed and is no longer just for women, but at the time that I went, it was. And I spent my first year of college there. Again, because I was planning to go to law school. The reason that I was planning to go to law school is because people told me in high school with my grades, I should either go to law school or medical school. And I listened to them and made that decision. I moved 12 hours away from home. I grew up in Alabama and this was in Virginia. So it was a long drive to get back and forth. And I missed my family. And also my social outlet in high school was band. And this school had no band. And I made the decision about halfway through the year that I was going to transfer and I was going to go to college in Alabama and decided to go to Auburn. My great grandmother lived 15 minutes away from there and we had visited it my whole childhood. And they had an awesome band and they also had an awesome school for what I had decided that I wanted to do at that point. You see, when I decided I was going to transfer, had to have a science class in order to transfer. And so I took human anatomy. It was the only class that I could take for half a year and get a full credit. It was a long class during the day. And so it gave you a full credit for a half a year. And I fell in love with it. And so then I decided I was going to change my major and be pre-med instead. And that's what I did. I finished college at Auburn, worked for a while in between college and medical school because honestly, I was trying to convince myself to do anything but medicine. I was a study coordinator for an outcomes study regarding cystic fibrosis patients at Nemours Children's Clinic in Orlando for a while. I also was a nursing home admissions coordinator for a while. My parents had moved to Florida when I was finishing up college and I moved down to be closer to them. And ultimately I decided that I did in fact want to go to med school. So studied for the MCAT, took that and went to the University of Miami School of Medicine in Miami. And while I was there, actually, when I started school there, I thought that I wanted to do family medicine. And then you get in your third year rotations and you figure out what exactly you like and don't like. And I really, really enjoyed doing procedural things, really loved my surgery rotation a lot, actually. And then I did OB and fell in love with delivering babies. And so then I decided to try to match in an OBGYN residency. I matched for residency at UF in Jacksonville, Florida. And that's where I've been since. So I trained there, had the opportunity to stay on as faculty in a hybrid academic and community practice in Jacksonville Beach. And that's what I did. At the end of my fourth year of residency, in May of that year, I had my first son, Matthew. And when he was 3 months old, we opened up a brand new practice in Jacksonville Beach. We ramped up pretty slowly and then started to get busier and busier. And at the time, the three of us who started this practice had decided that we were going to take a week of call at a time. Because we really weren't doing that many deliveries, it seemed doable, except that I had a 3-month-old. I'm not really sure exactly how I survived doing a week of call at a time with a 3-month-old because I just basically never really got good sleep, even on weeks that I wasn't on call. And eventually we decided to switch it and do every third night call because we got busier and that just wasn't sustainable anymore. So we got busy enough to hire a fourth partner after a couple of years, went to call 1 and 4, and I was on call 1 and 4 for the majority of the time that I worked in full scope practice. I had my son, Luke, 21 months after Matthew was born. And boy, did that throw me for a loop. Love my boys, the 2 kids under 3, full-time, full scope OBGYN practice with call every fourth night was a lot. My husband was also working as an accountant at the same academic medical center that employed me, and the kids were in daycare. And that worked for a while, but that's probably the first time I experienced burnout. I remember sitting in my office talking to my partner who had delivered, actually both of my original partners had been there when I delivered my second child. They were both in the room. It was like a cheering squad. And I remember sitting in my office talking to her shortly after he was born and telling her I felt like I was half-assing everything in my life. And I was miserable. I was in tears all the time. I felt like I wasn't a good mother and I wasn't a good doctor. I was also studying for my oral boards at the same time, which again, looking back, I should have had a little bit of self-compassion, but I didn't have that tool in my arsenal at the time. And so she basically said, why don't you try a little Zoloft? and I did. Thanks, Meredith. And it helped me at least get through boards without being a puddle of tears all the time. But of course, I felt guilty for needing a medication to tolerate my life, which was absolutely the wrong way to look at it, but it's where I was at the time. It's such a good example of the stigma associated with physicians seeking help or medication for depression, anxiety, which again, now I'm over, but at the time, I had guilt about that. And so I took it for about 6 months and then I stopped it. And I was doing okay. We'd adjusted to having the second child and the workload in life that goes along with that. Again, as much as we love them, it's just you're never shut off. You're constantly on when you're parenting two young children. So I ended up, after 5 years in that group, deciding that I was going to leave that group and join a private practice in the same city, actually at the same hospital. So I knew those docs. I had great partners for the entire time that I was working full scope clinical medicine. I was very blessed to have excellent partners the whole time. But really, part of the reason that I decided to leave that group was because I was sitting on labor and delivery one weekend day and I was talking to one of the female partners in the group that I was moving to. And she worked part-time. She took her full 1 in 4 call, but she only worked in the office a couple days a week. And she was basically making the same salary that I was making in the academic hybrid practice that was functioning like a private practice. Just, partner in a private practice versus working in an academic medical center, the pay is just different. And so I decided that I needed to have the ability to have some white space in my life because I was burning the candle at both ends and not tolerating it very well. I was also the primary breadwinner for my family, and I needed the money to make that white space possible. So I joined that private group. Of course, I felt like I needed to prove myself as a good partner. Again, that was my thought. Nobody told me that, but that was just how I felt. And I, felt like I needed to work full time to prove I was going to be a good partner. And so even though part of the impetus for me joining that group was to have some white space in my life, I didn't really take it at first. So I didn't really adjust my schedule for the first few years after I started at that group, but I knew it was possible to adjust it eventually. And that's part of the reason I made the decision to change groups. And then we decided when the kids were 5 and 3 that we needed a nanny. The daycare run to 2 separate schools once Matthew started kindergarten was a lot at the end of the day. So we hired a part-time nanny who picked up the kids in the afternoon and stayed with them until we got home. And that worked well for a while too. But then my husband's job got more stressful. My husband, Mike, worked as an accountant for the Medicaid Advantage plan that was associated with the academic medical center in town. And they were trying to get a contract for our region. He was putting in a crazy amount of hours and generally would get home after the kids were in bed unless I was on call. And when I was on call, he had to leave earlier to relieve our nanny. But on the nights that I wasn't on call, he was getting home after they went to sleep. The stress of that job was really affecting his health. And the juggling act wasn't working for us anymore. As great as our nanny was, and she was excellent, we decided that basically outsourcing the raising of our children to someone else was not something that we wanted to do anymore. Also, when I became a partner in the private practice, my salary had increased. And so we decided Mike was going to become a stay-at-home dad for a while so that our lives could get a little less crazy. And what a game changer that was for us. In fact, he still does that. My son, Luke, my youngest, is a senior in high school now. And so Mike's looking at planning to go back to work soon, but I could not have continued full-time, full scope OBGYN work, taking call without him doing what he did and becoming a stay-at-home dad. There's just no way that this would have lasted for me for as long as it did, because I was in full scope practice for 18 years until I switched and became a hospitalist. There is just no way that I could have continued to work full time without him picking up the mental load of handling school, doctor's appointments, activities, permission slips, grocery shopping, uniform shopping, laundry, all the things. So I stayed with that private practice group in Jacksonville Beach for a total of 11 years, from 2011 until 2022. We joined a larger statewide OBGYN group in 2019, and I got involved in leadership roles in that group. I was a regional medical director at first. and then became a board member toward the end of my time there. My partners in that group eventually decided to stop doing deliveries, which would have left me as the only one doing OB in the group, and that wasn't going to be sustainable for me. So I switched divisions of the large group we joined so I could keep on doing OB. Eventually, during that time, I backed down on the amount that I was working as well. I started taking my post-call afternoon off, and then I started taking off every Friday. I'd work my post-call day, but have Friday off. And eventually, toward the end of my time in full scope practice, I started taking the whole day off after call because the older you get, the longer it takes to recover from a night of delivering babies and call. That was just what I felt like I needed to do in order to continue doing the work. In the meantime, during that same time, I got involved in coaching as a coaching client and consumer. I dipped my toe in the coaching water first by listening to podcasts by other physician coaches. Those people were largely trained through the Life Coach School. So I listened to some of Brooke Castillo's podcasts. She's the founder of the Life Coach School. I joined Brooke's self-coaching scholars program for about 6 months, right about the time the pandemic hit, which it was very good to actually be in a coaching program during the pandemic because that was a whirlwind time. Then once we could start traveling again after the pandemic eased up, I went to coaching conferences and retreats. And at one of those retreats about 3 years ago, I was considering getting an MBA to advance in the leadership of the large OBGYN group where I worked. I thought I needed that. I had some people who told me that they didn't think I needed that. But as a woman trying to get into leadership of a medical organization, I felt like an MBA would have given me more credibility in a leadership role. And so I was debating it, and I went to this retreat. I also was overwhelmed with work call. I was on call every fifth night in the new group that I had joined when my other partners decided to stop doing OB. But on a lot of the nights that I wasn't on call, I was on Zoom calls for my leadership role. I had tried at various times advocating for some of those calls to actually happen earlier in the evening or during the workday, but that was not really something that anybody else wanted to discuss doing. And I was on the phone so many nights a week, it wasn't sustainable. And I sat at that retreat and I could barely speak because I was just so exhausted and I was a puddle of tears again. So burnout round number 2. And when I said I was planning to do an MBA, the coach who was leading that retreat gave me what I like to call the loving side eye. And she said, "You just told me you're overwhelmed with after hours calls and you're going to get an MBA. How's that going to work?" And she was absolutely correct. Later that afternoon, I had journaled at the retreat. I had gone for a long walk on the beach. The retreat was in Hilton Head. And I called my husband at home just to check in on him and the kids and make sure everything was going well. And he said, "I have never heard you so zen. I don't know what's happening there, but whatever it is, you need more of it." And he was right. So I decided to do coach certification instead of getting an MBA. And I signed up to train as a coach through the Life Coach School. And I spent most of 2023 on Saturday mornings while my husband and teenage boys were sleeping in with my laptop in front of me doing the work for Life Coach certification. And I finished that up in October of that year. So I had also, during all of that time, gotten involved in ACOG and advocacy work and was about to become a district officer in Florida, which was going to require time. So given all that I had on my plate, I was trying to figure out how I was going to make space in there for coaching and build a coaching practice, help other doctors with coaching, do advocacy work, and continue to work clinically. I was like, okay, this is a lot of things. I'm going to have to figure out how to make this work from a time perspective. And I still had very little white space in my life. Ultimately, in 2024, last year, I decided to switch clinical jobs and become an OB hospitalist, primarily so that I could continue to work clinically and continue to contribute because, and I love delivering babies. I didn't want to give that up, but I wanted to have time to pursue coaching and do advocacy work without flaming myself out, trying to hustle and do it all. And becoming an OB hospitalist has absolutely been the best decision for me. I'm sleeping more on the days that I'm off anyway. Full-time as a hospitalist is 7 24-hour shifts a month, and the rest of the days I'm off. So if I've had a bad night on call, I come home and I'm able to take a nap and then interact with my family in the afternoon. If I have a good night on call, which happens occasionally, then I can come home and, get some work done earlier in the day. work done at home, work done on my coaching business, or just sitting and reading a book. Something that I loved to do when I was younger, but I just didn't ever feel like I made the time for when I was in full scope OBGYN practice. I'm exercising more. I cook food at home instead of ordering out all the time. I go to the doctor regularly, something I really never did before I made this switch. And I see my husband and my kids. I'm home most afternoons when my son gets home from school, and we sit and have a chat for a little bit before he goes and escapes off into his room and his headset and his video games and his homework. And I love it. I've never really been here when my kids get home from school in the afternoon, and I'm loving that. And I'm still sometimes on Zooms at night, like I was when I was in the leadership role, but it's the Zooms that I choose. It's calls that I'm choosing to participate in, even though it was my choice to do that leadership role. I'm on these coaching calls at night because that's the time in their life that they have to do coaching calls. And so that works for them. So I make it work for me. I'm doing something that I love that fills my cup at the same time as I'm pouring into other doctors. So as for why the podcast, finally I get around to that. I went to a conference in early November this year of other physicians who coach, and I got inspired. Really, I've been thinking about doing a podcast for a while. I was intimidated a little bit by the tech of starting one, and this conference just pushed me to just freaking do it, as my new friend Manuela said, because done is better than perfect. And if you start and it's imperfect, you can make it better. But if you never start, you can't get better. I've sat and made a list of the topics I want to cover in some solo episodes, things like coaching tools and how they can help, self-compassion, boundaries at home, boundaries in the office, boundaries with technology and phone calls, those sorts of things. I also want to talk about nervous system regulation techniques, gender issues that are specific to women physicians and why we're more prone to burnout than our male colleagues are. And I also want to talk about getting involved in advocacy and changing the system at the same time as we work on ourselves. I've also made a long list of people that I'd love to interview on the podcast. Now, I'm an OBGYN, so my network is largely OBGYNs. A lot of these people that I want to interview are going to be OBGYNs, but this is a podcast for all women physicians because the issues that I'm going to be talking about with these people are issues that cut across every specialty. And I'm really looking forward to having good conversations with my friends, my amazing physician friends who are in my network, who are doing good things for patients and doing good things for their peers. I want to help amplify their messages and their work. So that's my why for being in the podcast space. I hope my listeners find the episodes valuable. Thanks for listening basically to my life story and how it led me to become a physician coach and want to help other physicians learn some of the lessons that I've learned the hard way. Thank you for listening. Now, I love coaching physicians one-on-one, and I have availability for one-on-one coaching clients. I'm also working right now on a 3-month group coaching program that will kick off in late January of 2026. I'd love for you to visit my website. The link's in the show notes. If you think you'd like to work with me for coaching, I do free short discovery calls. You can ask your questions about coaching, and we can see if it feels like we're a good fit. If group coaching feels more accessible to you, there's a link on the homepage to sign up for the wait list for the group. I'm planning to keep the group small. So if you're interested, the people on the wait list will get information about the group first and have the first shot to sign up. There's no commitment if you join the wait list. You just get your information before it goes out to everyone else. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.